My name is Riley Carson. I'm 34 and I live on the edge of Meadow Ridge, a small, tired town where everyone knows who drives what truck. My job in freight management isn't pretty, but it keeps the lights glowing and the roof steady above my son's head. I'm a divorced mom who can turn a single dollar into a full week of dinners. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. My boy Caleb is 7, bright-eyed, with a mind wired for wonder. He believes the universe is powered by pancakes and Lego bricks. Sometimes I wish it were. It started one hushed Sunday afternoon at my mother's dining table, where the stale scent of overcooked roast and the soft percussion of silverware scored what she called family talks. We all agreed to keep birthdays simple this year, Mom declared, her tone carved out of granite. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a decree. From behind his rustling newspaper, Dad nodded like a judge stamping an order that couldn't be appealed. My younger sister Bree laced her words with honey. That's perfect, Mom. We've gone overboard for years anyway. I offered a small, grateful smile. Since the divorce, my life had balanced on a thin, fraying rope. A quiet birthday felt like an answered prayer. Maybe, just once, the day could be about presents instead of price tags. When Caleb's birthday came that March, I honored the promise. We baked a crooked chocolate cake, laughing until our ribs ached when the frosting slumped to one side. The afternoon was spent at the park under an indecisive spring sky. I gave him a secondhand scooter I'd bargained for online, and his face lit up as if it had come straight from a toy commercial. Mom and Dad brought a puzzle and a bag of chips. Bree drifted in empty-handed, offering a bright smile and an excuse about forgetting the present at home. Caleb didn't catch it. I did. And I tucked that sting away quietly. 2 months later, Bree's twins turned 8. Caleb and I arrived with a modest gift bag, 2 small Lego sets, and a hand-drawn card he'd labored over, printing their names with careful, shaky pride. But the second we turned onto Bree's street, my gut twisted. The front yard looked like a traveling carnival had crash-landed there. Towering balloon arches swayed, banners flapped like sails, a bounce house puffed and wheezed in the wind. A snow cone cart sparkled beside an ice cream truck idling at the curb. Inside, the house gleamed like a showroom dressed for winter holidays. Glittering piles of branded boxes climbed the walls, expensive gadgets blinked from the floor, and metallic ribbons draped over every corner. Wow, I breathed, barely audible. Bree flashed a smile over the rim of her champagne glass. Oh, this. Just something small for the kids. When I handed her our simple gift, she spared it one passing glance. Thanks. Minutes later, the twins were tearing into iPads, designer hoodies, and AirPods, while a chorus of parents clapped like an audience. Caleb folded himself onto the carpet, knees hugged to his chest, eyes fixed on the avalanche of luxury unraveling before him. He didn't pout. He didn't cry. He just held his crumpled card tight to his lap, fingers tightening until his knuckles whitened. The sight cut through me like glass. Dad's voice drifted from behind me, low and warning. Don't make a scene, Riley. I forced a smile, swallowed the ache, and whispered, We're fine. I slipped Caleb's jacket over his shoulders and told him we were going for ice cream. He nodded once. No words, no protest. The car's steady hum filled the silence as we drove home through the dusky streets. He leaned his head against the window, watching the world blur, a small silhouette weighed down by something too grown for his age. I searched for the right words, but all I managed was, We'll do something fun this weekend, okay? Another small nod, and nothing else. Later that night, once Caleb's breathing softened into sleep, I sat in the dark living room. The quiet was thick, pressing against the walls like fog. The only light came from the blue-white glow of my laptop screen, reflecting the hard numbers staring back at me from my bank app. My phone lit up with rows of numbers that didn't lie. Each digit a quiet reminder of how many ways I had been holding everything together while everyone else had learned to lean on me. Mortgage payments, utility bills, their emergencies that became my normal. And as I stared at that cold, glowing balance, the air around me thickened into something heavy and still, like the moment before a storm decides where to break. It hadn't always been this way, but somewhere between good intentions and family guilt, I became the net beneath them, the one stretched thin but never allowed to tear. I paid off late fees, covered their shortfalls, and kept my own needs folded small in the corners of my life. And as that birthday night bled into the early hours, I felt something shift. Not loud or hot like rage, but colder, cleaner, like a blade being drawn from a sheath. The cursor blinked on my banking dashboard like it was daring me to move, and at 10:41 p.m., I did. One small click, a quiet decision, mortgage autopay disabled. No message, no explanation, no warning, just silence, clean and final, a thread finally cut. By morning, the peace of that click had transformed into noise. 71 missed calls, dozens of voicemails, a flood of frantic texts spilling across my lock screen. Mom, confused. Dad, demanding. Bree, furious. And then, as if the universe wanted to underline the moment, red and blue lights spilled through my kitchen window. A sheriff's cruiser sat at the end of my driveway, engine humming in the early chill. I opened the door before the knock could land. "Good morning, ma'am. Are you Riley Carson?" I nodded. He checked his clipboard, his tone careful but firm. "We received a report of property theft, a 2014 Burgundy Highlander." I blinked, incredulous, because the Highlander was parked exactly where it had always been. My driveway. Bree's car once, mine now. At least that's what I had believed. The truth was tangled. When my old Camry had given up its last breath, Bree had offered to sell me the SUV she no longer wanted. I took over the payments. I paid insurance, registration, repairs, every dime documented. But the title, oh, the title, she always waved it off like a formality that could wait. I grabbed my laptop from the couch, opened my folders, and laid it all bare to the officer. Receipts, text threads, voice messages from Tyler thanking me for taking the burden off their hands. He scrolled in silence, then exhaled through his nose, a man piecing together the edges of someone else's mess. "Has there been a disagreement recently?" he asked. I gave him the kind of smile that has no warmth. "You could say that." He nodded, already knowing. "I'll log this as a false report, but lock your doors for a few days, just in case." When the cruiser finally disappeared down the street, I stood in the quiet with my laptop still open in my hands, its weight suddenly too real. My phone buzzed again. Mom, Dad, Bree, Tyler, over and over. This time I didn't answer. Something inside me had turned like a dial clicking to a new setting. I had been the fixer, the provider, the one who smoothed out their chaos without complaint. And now they had painted me as a thief. I walked to the driveway, stared at the Highlander under the pale sun, and felt the last thread of obligation unravel. I emptied it piece by piece. Caleb's booster seat, his hoodie, a bag of coins that rattled like tiny ghosts in my palm. Then I drove it straight to Bree's house. No ceremony, no warning. I parked it crooked in her driveway, dropped the keys sealed in a Ziploc on the porch, and sent one text. "You want it so bad? Come get it." When I returned home, I pulled the grey folders from my closet, years of transfers, receipts, messages, proof of how deep their hands had reached into my life. I spread everything out across the kitchen table like evidence in a trial no one else would see. I wasn't planning revenge. I was keeping score for the first time. Every payment, every favor, every forgotten promise. All of it, mine again. The next morning, the air inside the house felt different. Not free, not yet, but still, like the first breath after breaking the surface. The empty space in the driveway stared back at me like a mirror. And for the first time in years, I didn't owe anyone an explanation. The morning light crept through the kitchen blinds, soft and pale, falling across the grey folders I'd left on the table like a quiet army waiting for orders. It wasn't rage that sat in my chest anymore. Rage is wild, messy, desperate to be heard. This was something colder, sharper, and far more dangerous. It was clarity. The kind of clarity that doesn't announce itself. It hums in your bones and sharpens your hands. I opened the folders and stared at the paper trail of my own exhaustion. Every transfer, every bill, every time I had said just this once. Mortgage payments that were never mine. Utility bills in my name for houses I didn't live in. Etsy business taxes I should never have touched. I'd held up a world that everyone else treated like their birthright. And now, I was finally realizing it didn't belong to me. I brewed coffee I barely tasted, the smell curling into the air like a slow unfurling of a new chapter. The first step was easy. The storage unit. A forgotten corner of my bank statements that had quietly drained me for 5 years. It was supposed to be temporary, a home for my mom's boxes of fabric, paint cans, and half-finished crafts. Bree had added her junk too, old toys and forgotten furniture. Every month, I had paid without thinking. So I drove there, steady and unhurried, like someone finally choosing the route herself. The manager, a grey-faced man with a clipboard, raised an eyebrow when I slid the key across the counter. "You've had that unit a long time," he said. "I know," I answered. "They have 2 weeks to clear it out. After that, auction it." His hesitation didn't touch me. "You sure?" "More than I've ever been," I said and walked away lighter. Back home, the messages kept coming. Missed calls, unread texts. None of them mattered. My fingers hovered over the keyboard of an email account I hadn't touched in years, the one I had used to set up Bree's Etsy store when she said the paperwork was too much. The business, the tax ID, the payments, all of it was still legally mine. When the page loaded, I saw what I already suspected. The shop was thriving. New orders, customer messages, reviews, and sitting at the top corner of the dashboard, a number that made my jaw tighten. 3,362s. Every dollar earned under my name, my number, my silence. I stared at that balance for a long time, the hum of the fridge the only sound in the house. Then I changed the password, updated the address, moved the money, clean, legal, mine. It wasn't vengeance, it was reclamation. The kind that doesn't require an apology afterward. By the time the sun dipped low, I felt the first real sliver of weight sliding off my shoulders. Caleb and I walked to the 24-hour diner down the street. He ordered pancakes even though it wasn't breakfast and I didn't stop him. He told me about a squirrel that stole his granola bar at recess, his eyes wide with exaggerated drama. I laughed so hard my ribs hurt. For the first time in a long time, we weren't talking about bills or Bree or anyone else's emergencies. Just us. Just a little pocket of peace. But peace has a way of being tested. When we returned home, a box sat on the porch, unmarked, taped carelessly like someone did it in the dark. A chill crawled up my spine as I carried it to the kitchen table. I peeled the tape back slowly, my hands steady even as my heartbeat wasn't. Inside were the 2 Lego sets Caleb and I had given Bree's twins. Not in boxes anymore. Crushed. Melted. The smell of burned plastic clung to the air like a ghost. No note, no explanation, just family cruelty in its purest, quietest form. Caleb shuffled into the room, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Mom, what's that?" I shut the lid before he could see. "Nothing," I said softly. "Something that doesn't belong here anymore." When he went back to bed, I taped the box shut again, grabbed my keys and drove through the humid night toward Bree's house. Every window was dark except the faint glow from upstairs. I didn't knock. I didn't text. I set the box down on her porch, right where she'd left her decency. No note, no goodbye, just quiet. On the drive back, the streetlights flickered across my windshield like punctuation marks in a sentence I was finally finishing. There are people who fill you up and people who drain you dry. My family had confused my kindness with a well that never runs empty. But they forgot something simple. Wells can run dry. Or they can be closed. When I got home, I opened my notebook and wrote their names in block letters across a clean page. Bree, Mom, Dad. Under each, one word. Enough. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a promise. It was the line being drawn. and as the night settled around me, that word felt more powerful than anything I'd ever said to them. For years, I'd carried everyone else's weight like it was my purpose. But this time, I was done carrying. This time, I was handing it back. The morning after the box, the house felt like it was breathing differently. The kind of quiet that doesn't beg to be filled, but waits, steady, as if it knows a storm has already passed. My phone buzzed before the coffee finished brewing, the family group chat lighting up like a siren. Mom's message came first, written like a town hall speech about family values and misunderstandings. Rita, I'm heartbroken. I don't understand why you're attacking everyone over something so small. We love you, but this behavior is unacceptable. Then came the twins' Lego explanation. It was just an accident, she said. They were just playing rough. And then the line I'd heard my entire life. The one that always came wrapped in false generosity and invisible chains. You need to remember everything we've done for you. I stared at the screen and laughed. A sound that didn't belong to joy, but to the clarity of seeing the same old script play out exactly the way you knew it would. Everything they had ever taken was always rebranded as something I owed. Every favor a chain, every sacrifice a reminder. I scrolled past the paragraphs of guilt, closed the thread, and opened my banking app. 2 small charges still sat there like stubborn ghosts, Mom's monthly makeup subscription and their cable package. Not much, but symbolic. Cancel, cancel. Each click echoed louder than I expected, like the sound of a door sealing shut. Around 5 in the afternoon, there was a knock at my door. Not Bree, not Mom. A stranger in a cheap gray suit holding a clipboard. Miss Carson? He asked. I nodded. I'm with Premier Recovery Services. Your mother, Diane Carson, hired us to collect $4,000. For a heartbeat, I just stared at him. Then I smiled, not warm, but sharp. Tell her to send the invoice to my lawyer, I said, and shut the door without another word. I slid down the wall and laughed until my ribs ached, because somewhere between absurdity and betrayal, the line between family and enemy had disappeared. This wasn't misunderstanding anymore. This was war. And they had fired the first real shot. That night, I opened a fresh notebook and drew a hard line down the center. On one side, what they owed me. On the other, what I owed them. The second column stayed blank. Then I named it Operation Clean Slate. I started collecting every object in my apartment that carried an invisible string. The air fryer Mom had gifted me with my own money. Bree's blender loaned 2 years ago. Dad's old toolbox I'd been guilted into keeping. Gifts that were really chains. By midnight, the trunk of my car was full. I drove to my parents' house in the quiet dark, the porch light glowing its familiar yellow. I didn't ring. I stacked the boxes against the railing one after another, like returning everything they had used to keep me tethered. When I got home, the street was slick with rain. That's when I saw it. Caleb's old stroller. The one he'd used when he was still a toddler. Sliced clean in half and left by the curb like a warning. The soaked fabric sagged in the rain, limp and lifeless. It wasn't random. It was a message. My phone buzzed again. Bree. Seriously? Over a birthday party? Then Mom. You're being childish. We're still your parents. And Dad. 1 sentence. You'll be hearing from a lawyer. I stared at the words as the thunder rolled in, typed 1 response and sent it to all 3. I have a lawyer too, and every receipt. Choose carefully. I photographed the broken stroller, printed the image, and slid it into a gray folder labeled Family Harassment. When you've spent your whole life keeping the peace, the moment you stop, they call it cruelty. But sometimes silence isn't cruelty. Sometimes silence is protection. 2 days later, I sat across from Dan, my attorney, the folder spread open between us. He flipped through the documents, eyes widening with every page. Riley, this isn't just messy. This is harassment. Financial exploitation on top of it. I nodded. I know. He tapped the pages into a neat stack. You've got more evidence than most civil cases I see. If they try anything, they'll lose before they even start. I exhaled. Do it. By that evening, the cease and desist letters were already out. Legally drawn lines now stood where I used to fold myself small. But the severing wasn't done. Two things still tethered me to them: the family phone plan and Netflix, their favorite leashes. I opened the phone account first, removing their numbers one by one, confirming each with quiet satisfaction. Then Netflix. I changed the password, renamed the main profile, and hit save. Petty? Maybe. But God, it felt clean. The next morning brought another flurry of messages. Bree, are you serious right now? Mom, you're acting like a stranger. Dad, grow up. I ignored every one of them. Years of explanations had only ever been twisted into weapons. Silence would be my language now. When Dan's email arrived confirming the legal notices had been sent, it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like oxygen. A week passed before anything changed. No texts, no calls, no guilt-drenched voicemails pretending to be concerned. Silence. It was eerie at first, like standing in the middle of an emptied-out house, hearing your own breath. But silence teaches you things. It showed me how much space they had taken up inside my head. How loud their voices had been, even when they weren't in the room. Then, one afternoon, someone knocked on the door. My stomach tightened. Through the peephole, Bree stood alone, holding a manila envelope like it weighed something she wasn't ready to admit. "I'm not here to fight," she said quickly when I opened the door just a crack. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "I just wanted to give you this." She handed it over, eyes flicking down to the floor. "You win," she whispered, and turned back to her car. Inside the envelope were 5 checks, each labeled in her looping handwriting. Car, $6,000. Etsy, $3,362. Storage, $167. Utilities, $2,300. And one last one. Everything else, $10,000. There was a note. "Riley, Mom and Dad are furious. They said not to do this. But I can't live like this anymore. I'm sorry for everything. Maybe someday we'll talk again. Or maybe not. But I hope you find peace. Bree." I stood at my kitchen counter for a long time, staring at the envelope like it might shift if I waited long enough. But my heart didn't leap. There was no victory, just a quiet sadness for everything that had burned to get here. I tore each check in half and dropped them into the trash, because this had never been about money. It was about respect. That night, Caleb and I built a fort out of mismatched sheets and chair legs. He strung fairy lights across the top with that same determined focus he used when building Lego castles. "It's our castle," he said, grinning up at me. "Yeah," I whispered, "and we don't need a crown to live in it." Later, we stayed up too late with pizza and hot chocolate, his mouth smudged with chocolate, eyes heavy with sleep. And for the first time, the peace in the room didn't feel borrowed. It was ours. Weeks rolled by without a single word from them. No debt collectors, no voicemails, no manipulation, just quiet. I redecorated. Sold the old couch my father had once called technically still his, bought a new one the color of a calm ocean. Let Caleb pick out plates with stars. Took down the family photos that felt dishonest and replaced them with his messy, beautiful art. Healing didn't arrive with an apology dinner or a final confrontation. It came on an ordinary Sunday when my phone hadn't buzzed all weekend and I didn't miss it. As the sun poured gold across the living room, I opened my notebook to the last page, the one that used to hold lists of debts and names. I wrote one final line. I didn't lose my family. I found myself. And for once, it wasn't a sentence I needed to believe. It was the truth. I closed the notebook, leaned back in the quiet, and let the silence settle around me like something I'd finally earned. It wasn't empty anymore. It was mine.